My sister stood up at family dinner and said, "I'm pregnant. With her husband's baby." I froze. My parents stared in shock. I smiled and said, "I'm so happy for you both." 9 months later, the DNA test revealed something that broke our entire family apart. The chocolate cake was still warm on my fork when my sister pushed back her chair. The scraping sound against the hardwood floor made everyone look up from their dessert plates. She stood there for a moment, her cardigan slightly wrinkled, hands trembling just enough that I noticed. The dining room fell quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning above us. "I have something to tell everyone," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone she used when she was about to drop important news. I remember thinking she might announce a new job or perhaps that she was finally moving out of our parents' house. At 26, she'd been talking about getting her own apartment for months. My mother set down her spoon and smiled encouragingly. "What is it, honey?" My father leaned forward slightly, his reading glasses reflecting the warm light from the chandelier. Even my mother-in-law, who usually kept to herself during these family gatherings, turned her attention toward my sister with genuine interest. "I'm pregnant," she announced, and the room erupted in congratulations before anyone processed what came next. My mother clapped her hands together. My father's face brightened. But then my sister raised her hand and something in her expression made everyone freeze. "The baby belongs to her husband." Before we continue with this shocking family revelation, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that truth matters more than keeping peace, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women facing betrayal. Now let's see how this unfolds. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt my grip loosen on the small dessert fork in my hands. The chocolate suddenly felt too rich, too sweet. My fork clattered against the plate, but the sound seemed to come from somewhere far away. My mother's mouth opened slightly but no words came out. She looked from my sister to me, then to my husband as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. My father's expression hardened, his jaw setting in that way it did when he was trying to control his temper. My husband finally looked up from his plate, but his eyes found my sister's face instead of mine. There was something there, something I couldn't quite name but recognized all the same. Not surprise. Not denial. Just a quiet acceptance that made my chest tighten. "David?" my mother whispered, using my husband's name like a question. "Is this true?" He nodded once, barely perceptible, his gaze dropping back to the table. His fingers drummed against the wood surface, a habit he'd developed whenever he felt cornered at work meetings. I'd watched him do it 100 times but never about something that involved me. My mother-in-law's reaction surprised me most. While everyone else sat frozen in shock, she leaned back in her chair with something that almost looked like relief. "Finally," she said, her voice soft but clear. I was beginning to think I'd never become a grandmother. The casual way she said it, as if my sister's pregnancy was a gift she'd been waiting for, made something cold settle in my stomach. Not once did she look at me. Not once did she acknowledge that this child would be born from betrayal, from the destruction of her son's marriage. My sister glanced at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Not guilt. Not apology. Something that looked almost like victory. She'd always been the prettier one, the one who drew attention effortlessly. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. "How long?" my father asked, his voice carefully controlled. 3 months, she replied, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "We didn't plan it, but we're happy." The words stung more than everything else combined. She'd already created a unit, a family that didn't include me. My husband and my sister had become we, while I sat at the same table, invisible. My mother finally found her voice. "Jessica, how could you?" she started, but my sister cut her off. "Mom, love doesn't follow rules. Sometimes these things just happen." Love. He called it love. As if that word could somehow make adultery acceptable, as if it could erase the fact that she'd systematically destroyed her own sister's marriage and felt proud of it. I realized everyone was waiting for me to react. To scream, to cry, to throw something. The silence stretched longer, becoming uncomfortable for everyone except me. In that moment I felt strangely calm, as if I was watching this scene happen to someone else. Then I smiled. It wasn't a genuine smile, but it was perfect. Polite, composed, the kind of smile I'd perfected in social situations when I needed to hide what I was really thinking. I watched my sister's confident expression falter slightly, confusion flickering across her features. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady. "I'm so happy for you both." My mother stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. My father's eyebrows drew together in concern. Even my husband looked up, probably expecting anger or tears. But I kept smiling, kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, kept my voice level. "When are you due?" My sister blinked, clearly thrown off by my reaction. "December," she said hesitantly. "A winter baby. How wonderful." I picked up my fork again and took another bite of cake as if we were discussing the weather. "Will you continue working at the clinic?" The conversation stumbled forward from there, awkward and stilted. My mother tried to fill the silence with practical questions about doctors and prenatal care. My father retreated behind his coffee cup. My mother-in-law began talking about baby names and nursery arrangements. Through it all, I maintained my composure. I asked appropriate questions, made supportive comments, and acted like the perfect sister-in-law. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The woman who had walked into this dinner hoping to reconnect with her husband was gone. In her place sat someone else entirely. Someone who understood that tears and anger would only give them what they expected. Someone who knew that the best revenge isn't always immediate or obvious. Someone who had learned, in the span of a single dessert course, that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. As the evening wound down and everyone prepared to leave, I hugged my sister goodbye. She felt tense in my arms, still uncertain about my reaction. "Thank you," I whispered in her ear, just loud enough for her to hear. "For showing me exactly who you are." She pulled back, searching my face for meaning, but I was already turning away. The real conversation would come later. Much later. When I was ready and when it would matter most. That night, as I lay in bed listening to my husband's careful breathing beside me, I made a decision. I wouldn't be the screaming, heartbroken wife. I wouldn't be the victim in this story. I would be something much more dangerous. I would be patient. The chocolate cake had been delicious, but it would be the last sweet thing I'd taste for a very long time. From now on, everything would have the bitter edge of betrayal. And I would use that bitterness to fuel something they'd never see coming. My smile in the darkness wasn't polite anymore. It was planning. The first 3 days passed without a single phone call. I kept checking my cell phone, expecting someone to reach out, to ask how I was holding up after the dinner revelation. But the screen remained dark. My parents, who usually called daily just to chat, suddenly went silent. My closest friend Sarah, who normally texted me random thoughts throughout the day, seemed to have forgotten I existed. David started leaving for work an hour earlier than usual. He'd shower quietly, dress in the walk-in closet, and slip out while I pretended to sleep. When he came home, it was always after 9 o'clock with some excuse about client meetings or paperwork. He'd heat up leftovers, eat standing at the kitchen counter, and mumble something about being tired before disappearing into the guest bedroom. The third night, I heard him on the phone through the thin wall. His voice was soft, careful, the way he used to talk to me when we were dating. "How are you feeling today?" he asked someone. "Did you remember to take your vitamins?" The tenderness in his tone made my stomach turn. He'd never asked me about vitamins, not even when I had the flu last winter. Jessica called him every morning at 7:30 sharp. I knew because his phone buzzed on the nightstand and I could see her name lighting up the screen. He'd grab it quickly and step onto the balcony for privacy. Through the glass doors, I watched him pace back and forth, occasionally laughing at something she said. Once I saw him touch his chest where his heart was, the gesture so intimate it felt like watching something I shouldn't see. My mother-in-law arrived on Thursday with shopping bags from Target. She didn't knock, just used her spare key and called out cheerfully as she entered. "I found the most adorable little outfits," she announced, spreading tiny clothes across my coffee table. Yellow onesies with cartoon ducks. A miniature sweater with matching booties. A soft blanket with teddy bears embroidered along the edges. "Isn't this precious?" she cooed, holding up a newborn-sized sleeper. I couldn't resist. "The baby will need so many things." She spoke about the pregnancy as if it were a family celebration, not the destruction of her son's marriage. Her excitement felt genuine, undiluted by shame or guilt. In her mind, Jessica was giving her what I had failed to provide. A grandchild. A legacy. Purpose. "I've already started converting the spare room upstairs," she continued, folding the clothes with practiced precision. David mentioned you two weren't using it for anything important anyway. It'll make a perfect nursery once the baby arrives. The casual way she erased me from the equation stung more than I expected. My art supplies lived in that room. My easel, my canvases, the painting I'd been working on for months. But apparently my creative space wasn't important enough to preserve. I watched her arrange the baby clothes in neat piles, her movements efficient and purposeful. She'd already mentally redesigned my house, planned my future, and written me out of the story entirely. I was just an inconvenient detail, something to be worked around rather than considered. "Have you thought about moving back with your parents?" she asked suddenly, not looking up from her organizing. "It might be easier for everyone involved. Less awkward, you know." The suggestion hit me like cold water. She wanted me gone. Not just emotionally distant or accepting of the situation, but physically removed from the picture. In her perfect world, David and Jessica would raise their child in my house, surrounded by my furniture, sleeping in my bed. I excused myself and went upstairs, leaving her to her shopping display. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back seemed smaller somehow, faded around the edges. When had I become so easy to dismiss? That evening I decided to test something. I made David's favorite dinner, grilled salmon with lemon butter, roasted asparagus and garlic mashed potatoes. I set the table with our wedding china, lit candles, and even put on the dress he'd bought me for our first anniversary. He walked in at 9:15, saw the setup and froze. "What's all this for?" "I thought we could talk," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "About everything. About us." He shifted uncomfortably, checking his phone twice during my sentence. "Listen, Sarah, I'm really tired tonight." Rain check. Sarah. He called me Sarah. My friend's name. The same friend who hadn't contacted me since the dinner. The same friend who, I suddenly realized, had been unusually quiet about my marriage problems lately. "Did you just call me Sarah?" I asked. His face flushed. "No," I said. "I meant." He fumbled for words, then gave up. "I'm going to bed." After he left, I sat alone at the carefully set table, staring at the untouched food. The candles burned down to stubs while I processed what had just happened. It wasn't just Jessica. Sarah was involved too. My husband was juggling multiple relationships while I played house with his dirty laundry. I blew out the candles and began clearing the table. In the kitchen, while scraping uneaten salmon into the garbage disposal, I found a receipt tucked behind the coffee maker. Lunch for two at Romano's, our anniversary restaurant. The date was yesterday. The timestamp showed 1:30 p.m., when David had texted me about a work lunch with colleagues. But it was the handwritten note on the back that made my hands shake. "Can't wait to feel the baby kick. Love you both. D." Both. He loved them both. Jessica and the baby. A ready-made family that didn't include me. I climbed the stairs slowly, past the spare room where my mother-in-law had left baby clothes scattered across my art table. In my bedroom, I opened the laptop and searched for something I'd never thought I'd need to research. DNA testing services. The websites explained paternity tests, chain of custody procedures, legal implications. I bookmarked 3 different companies and compared their processing times. Then I opened my old address book, the leather-bound one my mother had given me as a wedding gift. I flipped through pages of contact information, past college friends and distant relatives, until I found what I was looking for. Aaron Mitchell. Jessica's ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago. The one she'd cried over for months after their breakup. The one my parents thought was too intense and not stable enough for their daughter. I stared at his phone number, written in my own careful handwriting from when Jessica had asked me to keep it, just in case. She'd made me promise never to delete it, claiming she might need it someday for closure. Well, closure was exactly what I planned to give her. I dialed Aaron's number the next morning while David was in the shower. My fingers trembled as I pressed each digit, muscle memory guiding me through numbers I'd looked at but never called. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar voice answered. "Hello. Aaron, it's Sarah. Jessica's sister." I kept my voice steady, professional. "I know this is unexpected, but I need to ask you something important." There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear traffic and what sounded like construction equipment. "Sarah? Oh, it's been, 2 years? Is everything okay? When did you last see Jessica?" Another pause, longer this time. "Why are you asking?" "Please, Aaron. It's complicated, but I really need to know." He sighed. We ran into each other about 4 months ago at that coffee shop on 5th Street. He seemed different. Happier, I guess. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Why? 4 months ago. Right around the time Jessica claimed the affair with David had started. But if she was 3 months pregnant now, the timing didn't add up. I thanked Aaron and hung up, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. I spent the rest of the week becoming a detective in my own life. While David was at work, I went through our shared calendar, cross-referencing his business trips with Jessica's social media posts. David had been in Chicago for a 3-day conference in early February. During those exact dates, Jessica had posted photos from a beach vacation in Florida with friends. Yet she told everyone at dinner that those February days were when their relationship had deepened. Her Instagram told a different story than her pregnancy announcement. I scrolled back through months of posts, screenshotting timestamps and locations. There were pictures of her at wine tastings in January, holding full glasses with captions about treating myself. Photos from a ski trip in December where she was clearly drinking beer with friends. If she was 3 months pregnant now, she would have been drinking alcohol throughout her first trimester. But it was the photo from Valentine's Day that stopped me cold. Jessica at a romantic restaurant, holding hands across the table with someone whose face was partially obscured by candlelight. The man had Aaron's distinctive silver watch, the one with the scratched bezel that he'd worn every day when they were dating. I zoomed in on the image until the pixels blurred, but I was certain. That weekend I suggested David and I visit Jessica to check on her and start being more supportive. He seemed surprised by my sudden interest but agreed. I packed a gift bag with herbal teas and a beautiful ceramic mug set I'd bought specifically for this purpose. Jessica's apartment was different. Tidier. She'd always been messy, leaving dishes in the sink and clothes draped over furniture. But now everything was organized, almost clinical. Pregnancy magazines were stacked neatly on the coffee table next to prenatal vitamin bottles that looked untouched. "You look wonderful," I told her, studying her face carefully. She did look different, but not in the way pregnant women usually did. She seemed nervous, jumpy. Her eyes darted between David and me like she was calculating something. "Thank you for the tea set," she said, unwrapping my gift. "It's beautiful. I thought you might enjoy having something special for your morning routine," I replied, watching as she examined each piece. "Would you like me to make you some tea now? You should stay hydrated." She agreed, and I busied myself in her kitchen, deliberately taking my time. When I returned with the steaming mug, we chatted about doctor appointments and baby preparations. Jessica held the cup carefully, sipping the chamomile tea I'd brewed strong enough to mask any lingering taste. "Have you thought about telling Aaron?" I asked casually, noting how her hand froze halfway to her lips. "Why would I tell Aaron anything?" she replied, but her voice had an edge to it. "Oh, I just thought, you two were so close once. Doesn't he deserve to know you're happy?" David looked confused by the direction of our conversation, but Jessica's face had gone pale. She set down the mug with shaking hands and excused herself to the bathroom. While she was gone, I quickly wrapped the used mug in a napkin and slipped it into my purse. Later that week, I visited David's dentist office during lunch, claiming I needed to pick up his insurance forms. The receptionist, who knew me from previous visits, chatted pleasantly while I waited. When she stepped away to make copies, I quietly took David's spare toothbrush from the drawer where he kept his travel dental supplies. The DNA testing kit arrived in unmarked packaging. I followed the instructions precisely, swabbing the inside of the mug Jessica had used and carefully preserving saliva from David's toothbrush. I labeled everything according to the lab's specifications and drove to the post office myself, not trusting the mailbox pickup. The waiting was torture. 2 weeks felt like 2 months. I went about my normal routine, but everything felt surreal, like I was acting in a play where I'd forgotten my lines. David continued his pattern of early departures and late returns. My mother-in-law brought more baby items. Jessica posted ultrasound photos on social media that I studied like puzzle pieces. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Plain white, no return address except for the lab's P.O. box. My hands shook so violently I could barely tear it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with official letterhead and clinical language that reduced my entire world to percentages and probabilities. Based on genetic analysis, David Mitchell is excluded as the biological father of the tested sample. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read the line 3 times before the words sank in. David wasn't the father. The baby Jessica was carrying belonged to someone else. All of this, the family dinner announcement, the guilt, the destruction of my marriage, was built on a lie. But I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront Jessica or David or demand explanations. Instead, I folded the paper carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Then I made a grocery list and planned the most important dinner party of my life. The invitations were simple, elegant. Join us for a celebration dinner to welcome our family's newest addition. I hand-delivered them to my parents, mailed one to my mother-in-law, and personally drove to Aaron's current address to slip one under his door. At the bottom of each invitation I added a handwritten note. Your presence would mean the world to us during this special time. Aaron's invitation included one additional line. There's something important you need to know. The stage was set. The truth was ready to make its debut. And for the first time in weeks I felt genuinely excited about something. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharper, more defined. I spent the entire day preparing, moving through my kitchen with a precision I'd never felt before. Every detail mattered tonight. The roast beef had to be perfect. The wine had to breathe at exactly the right temperature. The dining room had to look welcoming enough to lower everyone's guard. David noticed my unusual energy but misinterpreted it completely. It's nice to see you excited about having everyone over, he said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. I think this dinner will be good for all of us. I smiled and handed him the cloth napkins to fold. Yes, I think tonight will change everything. My parents arrived first, my mother carrying a bouquet of yellow roses and my father holding a bottle of champagne. For the celebration, he said, though his smile seemed forced. I could tell they were still processing everything that had happened at the last family dinner, still trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality. My mother-in-law swept in 15 minutes later with a jewelry box tucked under her arm. I brought something special, she announced, opening it to reveal a delicate silver anklet with tiny bells. This was David's when he was a baby. I've been saving it for my first grandchild. The casual possessiveness in her voice made my jaw clench, but I maintained my composure. How thoughtful of you to bring family heirlooms, I said, taking the box from her hands. I'm sure the baby will treasure this someday. Jessica and David entered together, and I noticed immediately how comfortable they'd become with each other. She had her hand on his arm as they walked through the door, and he guided her to the most comfortable chair without being asked. They moved like a couple who'd been together for years, not two people caught in a scandalous affair. You look radiant, my mother told Jessica, and it was true. My sister practically glowed with satisfaction. She was wearing a flowing dress that emphasized her still small bump, and she kept one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Every gesture seemed calculated to remind everyone of her condition, of the precious life she was carrying. Dinner conversation flowed surprisingly smoothly. We talked about baby names and nursery themes. My father shared stories about when Jessica and I were children. My mother-in-law discussed her plans for spoiling her grandchild. Through it all, I played the perfect hostess, refilling wine glasses and steering conversations away from any awkward silences. I served the soup course with steady hands, though inside I felt like I was vibrating with nervous energy. Everyone complimented the butternut squash bisque, and I graciously accepted their praise while mentally counting down the minutes until dessert. The main course came and went. My mother helped me clear plates while the men discussed football scores. Jessica excused herself to the bathroom twice, each time returning with David's concerned attention. Are you feeling all right? He asked after her second trip. Maybe you should lie down. I'm fine, she assured him, but I caught the quick glance she shot toward the front door. She was nervous about something, though she was hiding it well. As I brought out the dessert plates, the doorbell rang. The entire table went quiet. David checked his watch, frowning. Are we expecting someone else? Actually, yes, I said, setting down the dessert tray and smoothing my dress. I invited one more guest. I thought it would be nice to have the whole family together. I opened the front door to find Aaron standing on my porch, dressed in a navy suit with a burgundy tie. He'd gotten his hair cut since I'd last seen him, and he looked nervous but determined. In his hand was a small gift bag with tissue paper peeking out the top. Aaron, I said warmly, loud enough for everyone in the dining room to hear. Thank you so much for coming. Please come in. The silence from the dining room was deafening. I led Aaron through the hallway, watching as every head turned toward us. My parents looked confused. My mother-in-law appeared annoyed by the interruption. David's eyebrows were drawn together in a deep frown. But Jessica's reaction was what I'd been waiting for. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. She started to stand, then sat back down, then gripped the edge of the table like she needed it for support. Her mouth opened and closed without making any sound. "Everyone," I announced cheerfully, "I'd like you to meet Aaron Mitchell. He's an old friend of the family. Aaron, you remember my parents, of course. And this is my mother-in-law, Patricia. My husband, David. And Jessica." Aaron's eyes found Jessica immediately, and something passed between them that was too complex for me to fully understand. Recognition certainly, but also pain, longing, and something that might have been hope. "Hello, Jessica," he said quietly. "You look different. What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I invited him," I said, moving to the sideboard where I'd placed an envelope earlier that evening. "I thought it was time we all got to know each other better. Especially since we're going to be family." David was staring at Aaron with growing suspicion. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you?" "I'm Jessica's ex-boyfriend," Aaron replied, his voice growing stronger. "We dated for almost 2 years. Until she broke up with me 6 months ago." The math hung in the air like smoke. 6 months ago. Not 2 years. Jessica's carefully constructed timeline was beginning to unravel in real time. "Actually," I said, reaching for the envelope, "I think there's something everyone should know before we have dessert. Something that changes everything." My hands were remarkably steady as I opened the envelope and pulled out the lab results. Jessica made a small sound, almost like a whimper. David looked back and forth between Aaron and Jessica, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place in his mind. "I had some tests done," I announced to the room. "Just to be absolutely certain about the baby's paternity. You know, for medical history purposes. Family genetics are so important." I unfolded the paper and read aloud, my voice clear and strong. "Based on genetic analysis, David Mitchell is excluded as the biological father. Probability of paternity, 0%. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the next room. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. My father removed his glasses and cleaned them unnecessarily. My mother-in-law's mouth hung open in shock. Aaron stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. "Jessica? Is there something you need to tell me?" But Jessica just sat frozen, staring at the paper in my hands like it was a weapon pointed directly at her heart. "The real question," I said, folding the results and placing them back in the envelope, "is why my sister felt the need to destroy my marriage for a baby that was never my husband's to begin with." The explosion that followed my revelation shattered more than just the evening. Jessica finally found her voice, but it came out as desperate denials mixed with accusations. "You planned this," she screamed at me, pointing a shaking finger across the table. "You orchestrated this whole thing just to humiliate me." Aaron stood frozen near the doorway, still holding his gift bag, trying to process what he'd walked into. "Jessica, is the baby mine?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned on him with fury I'd never seen before. "Don't you dare come in here acting like you care. You left me, remember? You said I was too much drama for your precious career." "You broke up with me," Aaron shot back, his confusion evident. "You said you needed space. You said you'd found someone else. Because I was pregnant and you weren't ready to be a father." The words tore out of her throat like they'd been trapped there for months. The room erupted. My mother gasped and covered her mouth. My father stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. David finally spoke, his voice cold and distant. "So this whole thing was what? Some elaborate scheme to trap me into raising another man's child?" Jessica's face crumpled, but there were no tears. Just raw desperation. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I was scared. Aaron had already moved on, gotten that promotion in Seattle. You were married but miserable. I thought if I could just make it work." "Make what work?" David demanded. "Destroying my marriage? Lying to our entire family?" My mother-in-law rose from her chair like a queen dethroned. The silver anklet she'd brought sat abandoned on the table, its tiny bells silent. "I have grandchildren to spoil," she announced icily. but they won't be coming from this family. She gathered her purse and coat with precise movements, each gesture radiating wounded pride. David, when you decide to start acting like the man I raised, you know where to find me. She left without looking back, and somehow her departure felt more final than any screaming match could have. My father was the next to speak, his voice heavy with disappointment. Jessica, how could you do this to your sister? To our family? Don't lecture me about family loyalty, Jessica snapped, her desperation morphing into defensive anger. Where was everyone when I needed support? When I was scared and alone? You were never alone, my mother said quietly, tears streaming down her face. We would have helped you. We would have supported you and the baby. We would have worked something out with Aaron. But this, lying, manipulating, destroying your sister's marriage. This isn't who we raised you to be. Aaron set his gift bag on the side table and walked closer to Jessica. I would have come back, he said simply. If you told me about the baby, I would have figured out a way to make it work. I loved you. Loved, Jessica repeated bitterly. Past tense. Yes, Aaron confirmed without hesitation. Past tense. Because the woman I loved wouldn't have done this. The fight went out of Jessica all at once. She slumped in her chair, one hand still resting on her stomach, looking smaller and more lost than I'd ever seen her. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. David turned to me and I saw something I hadn't expected in his eyes. Not guilt or shame but relief. Thank you, he said quietly. For finding out the truth. For ending this before it went any further. Don't thank me, I replied, my voice steady. Thank yourself. You made your choices long before tonight. He nodded slowly, understanding passing between us. I'll pack some things and stay at a hotel. We should probably talk about the practical stuff. Lawyers and all that. There's nothing to discuss, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I'll file the papers this week. You can have your lawyer contact mine. Sarah, I know I messed up, but maybe we could try counseling. Even if the baby had been yours, I interrupted, I'd still be done. This isn't about Jessica or the pregnancy. It's about who you chose to be when you thought no one was watching. That silenced him completely. My parents gathered their things quietly, my mother pausing to kiss my forehead. We're proud of you, she whispered, for handling this with such grace. My father squeezed my shoulder. You'll stay strong. You always have. After they left, it was just Jessica, Aaron, David, and me in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of what was supposed to be a celebration dinner. The silence stretched until Aaron finally spoke. I need to know about the baby's health, he said to Jessica. Medical history, prenatal care, everything. This changes things for me too. Jessica nodded mutely, finally understanding that her elaborate deception had gained her nothing and cost her everything. David disappeared upstairs and returned with a hastily packed suitcase. He paused at the front door, looking back at me one more time. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. I know you are, I replied. But sorry doesn't fix anything. It just makes you feel better about walking away. After he left, Aaron helped Jessica to her car. I watched from the window as they stood talking in my driveway for nearly 20 minutes. Their body language told the whole story. His careful distance, her pleading gestures, his final shake of the head before walking to his own car. I spent the rest of the evening cleaning up alone, washing dishes and folding napkins and putting away the good china. The house felt different already, lighter somehow, despite everything that had happened. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. The truth was out, the lies were exposed, and whatever came next would be built on solid ground. The quiet that settled over my house that night wasn't the suffocating silence of secrets. It was the peaceful quiet of truth finally spoken, of masks finally removed, of a woman finally free to breathe in her own home. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my favorite chair, looking around at the space that was wholly mine again. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork and difficult conversations. But tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like myself again. The first morning I woke up alone in my house felt like emerging from underwater. No rushing footsteps in the hallway, no shower running while I made coffee, no careful tiptoeing around someone else's mood. Just silence and possibility stretching ahead of me like an empty canvas. I made breakfast for one, scrambled eggs with fresh herbs from the garden I'd neglected for months. As I ate at the kitchen counter, still in my pajamas at 9 in the morning, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something this simple without checking the time or worrying about someone else's schedule. The divorce papers were surprisingly straightforward. David's lawyer was efficient and businesslike, clearly wanting to wrap things up quickly. There were no fights over property or assets, no bitter negotiations. David kept his car and his retirement account. I kept the house and everything in it. We split our shared savings down the middle and went our separate ways. 3 weeks after the dinner party, I found myself sitting in my art room, the space my mother-in-law had wanted to convert into a nursery. I'd reclaimed it completely, setting up my easel by the window where the morning light was best. My fingers felt clumsy at first, rusty from months of neglect, but muscle memory kicked in as I mixed colors on my palette. I wasn't painting anything specific, just letting the brush move across the canvas in whatever direction felt right. Blue gave way to green, then to purple, then to yellow. Colors I hadn't allowed myself to use when everything in my life felt gray. That's when I started writing. Not because I had some grand plan or message to share, but because the thoughts in my head needed somewhere to go. I created an anonymous blog called Second Chances, and wrote about the small discoveries I was making each day. How it felt to cook dinner without worrying if someone else would like it. How it felt to watch whatever I wanted on television. How it felt to go to bed when I was tired instead of staying up waiting for someone who might not come home. The responses surprised me. Women from all over the country began commenting, sharing their own stories of betrayal and rebuilding. Some were going through divorces. Others had survived affairs. A few were dealing with family betrayals that made my situation look simple by comparison. "You're so brave," one woman wrote. "I wish I had your strength." But I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was stumbling through each day, figuring it out as I went along. Strength seemed too big a word for what I was doing. I was just refusing to give up. My father called on a Tuesday evening, something he'd never done before. David had always been the one to maintain contact with my family. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you better. Dad, you couldn't have known. I could have asked more questions. I could have paid closer attention to how you looked during those family dinners. You were disappearing right in front of us, and we were all too focused on your sister's drama to notice." His honesty caught me off guard. We talked for an hour, really talked in a way we hadn't since I was a teenager. He told me about his own parents' troubled marriage, about lessons he'd learned too late to help his daughters navigate their relationships. My mother visited the following weekend, bringing homemade soup and staying to help me reorganize the guest room. As we folded linens together, she cried quietly. "I failed you," she said. "I was so worried about keeping the peace that I forgot to protect my own daughter." "You didn't fail me, Mom. You couldn't have prevented Jessica's choices. But I could have made different choices myself. I could have called you more. I could have insisted on spending time with you separately, not just at family gatherings where everyone was performing for each other." These conversations with my parents felt like finding pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. The daughter who'd been confident and funny before she'd learned to shrink herself to fit into someone else's life. Jessica's baby was born in December, right on schedule. Aaron was there for the delivery, I heard through my mother, but he didn't stay. He'd moved back to Seattle permanently, establishing a custody arrangement that would allow him to be part of his daughter's life without having to rebuild a relationship with Jessica. My mother-in-law never called or visited. David's sister sent a brief text apologizing for her mother's behavior, but that was the extent of contact from that side of the family. Their absence felt like a gift rather than a loss. I realized how much energy I'd spent trying to earn approval from people who'd never really accepted me. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself writing a letter I knew I'd never send. It started as therapy, a way to organize my thoughts about everything that had happened. But as I wrote, it became something else, a strange kind of gratitude letter. "Dear Jessica," it began, "you probably think I hate you. You probably think I'll spend the rest of my life bitter about what you did to my marriage. But here's what you don't understand, you didn't steal my life. You freed me from a life that was slowly suffocating me." I wrote about how my marriage had been failing long before she'd gotten involved. How David and I had been going through the motions for months, maybe longer. How I'd been so focused on being the perfect wife that I'd forgotten who I was underneath all that effort. "You showed me what I was really worth to my husband," I continued. You showed me what I was worth to his family. You showed me that the life I was fighting so hard to preserve wasn't actually worth preserving. The letter filled 3 pages before I was finished. I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, underneath the DNA test results that had changed everything. Some truths were meant to be acknowledged privately, not shared. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair with a book I'd been wanting to read for months. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering my small garden in white. Inside, my house was warm and quiet and completely my own. For the first time since that devastating dinner party, I felt genuinely happy. Not the desperate, grasping happiness of someone trying to convince themselves everything was fine, but the deep, steady contentment of someone who'd learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. I had my truth. I had my freedom. I had my second chance. And that was more than enough to build a life on. If this story of hidden truth and quiet strength had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sarah revealed the DNA results at that perfectly orchestrated dinner party, watching everyone's masks finally fall. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.